I haven't camped since that summer. In fact, I still can't sleep under thin fabric. Even the idea of a mesh window over my head makes my stomach knot. People think it's funny when I say that, like I'm just another guy with a bad childhood camping story. But what happened to me at the Land Between the Lakes wasn't funny. It's followed me for more than 30 years. Back when I was a kid, 9 years old, my little brother a year and a half behind me, something horrible happened. My dad was a believer in teaching the boys the outdoors. So every summer meant fishing trips, hiking trails, tents pitched under the stars. Back then, I loved it. I loved the smell of wood smoke and the thrill of night sounds in the trees. That trip was supposed to be no different than any of the other ones that we took. A simple weekend at a quiet campground deep in the Land Between the Lakes. Our first time that far into the park. I've spent most of my adult life wondering if what I saw that night was real or just some half-dream cooked up by a scared kid's imagination. For a long time, I kept my mouth shut. Then I started reading other people's accounts. Stories about the beast of the Land Between the Lakes. Every detail matched. The height, the eyes, the smell. The way it didn't act like an animal. The way it showed no fear. That's when I stopped doubting myself. I've listened to everything on your channel, and I feel comfortable telling you my story. That night, something came to our camp. It didn't attack us. It just wanted me to know it was there. We pulled into the campground late that afternoon. The sun was still hanging high, but the air already starting to cool off. It was one of those perfect Kentucky evenings, the kind that smells like pine sap, lake water, wood smoke. You know, the great outdoors. But I don't see them as so great anymore. Dad parked the truck close to the site while Mom started unpacking food. And then he handed me and my brother our tent bag and said, "Let's see what you boys remember from last summer." We got it standing after a few minutes of arguing about poles. It was a small two-person dome tent, barely big enough for the both of us, set about 20 feet from where my parents staked their tent down. Between the two sat our campfire, already crackling and popping, throwing sparks into the air as the forest came alive with the noises of nature. Everything felt safe. Everything felt familiar. Dad talked about coyotes while we ate, warning us not to leave food out. Mom told us not to listen to him, that coyotes were more scared of us than we were of them. After dinner, we roasted marshmallows and told dumb jokes until the sky turned dark blue and the first bats started swooping through the treetops. It was cozy, the kind of night that makes you forget anything bad could ever happen in the world. But sometime after we crawled into our sleeping bags, that feeling started to shift. The forest sounds, always so alive at night, began to fade. The crickets slowed and then stopped altogether. I couldn't sleep. My brother was already snoring softly beside me, but I lay there staring up through the mesh of the roof and the tent. I was watching the moon filter through the branches, and then I heard something. This slow, steady huff, 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 just outside the tent. It was rhythmic, deep, like something breathing through a huge nose. At first, I told myself it was just Dad messing with us, but it wasn't. It was too close, too big. It was moving like an animal. At first, it was faint. Just the soft pad of animal feet on dirt. Then another. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was slow, like something taking its time, being really careful. I thought maybe it was a deer wandering close to camp. We'd seen tracks earlier that day, and Dad said they come down at night to lick the ash near old fire pits or something like that. I told myself that was all it was. But the sound kept circling. Whatever this was, it was too close to be a deer now, and deer didn't circle tents as far as I knew. The footsteps were heavy, not the quick light taps of hooves either. Whatever that thing was had weight. I could feel each one thump softly through the ground beneath my sleeping bag. And then, something blotted out the moonlight. This massive shadow slid across the top of the tent, stretching from one side to the other. I froze, staring up through the mesh roof. I wanted to scream. The shape lingered there, tall, broad, hunched over because it was so tall. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it would wake my brother, but he just shifted and mumbled half asleep. And then this thing leaned closer. This wolfen face appeared above the mesh, inches from my own. I saw two amber eyes catch the dim light of our little lantern, and they glowed back at me. reflecting like an animal's, but sharper and focused. Even then, that thing looked intelligent, like it was peeking in trying to see what was going on. The head was wolf-like, but longer, the snout narrower, the fur dark and matted. It had a scar going down underneath its left eye. Its ears stood straight up, twitching. When it exhaled, the warm air pushed through the mesh and hit my face. It smelled disgusting. It was wet and foul, like rotting meat and old blood. And then its teeth parted slightly, and for this awful moment, I realized it looked like it was smiling at me. But not a happy smile. A twisted, sadistic smile. That gaze, it froze me. I couldn't move or breathe. I just stared back at it as this thing lowered its snout closer to the tent. I could see its nostrils flaring, and the fabric pulsed inwards with every sniff. And then slowly, it raised one clawed hand into view, like it wanted to show me what its hands were capable of. The claws were long, longer than my fingers, and curved. They pressed gently into the mesh, like it was testing it. The tips gleamed faintly in the moonlight, tracing little indentations just inches from my face. It dragged them downwards in a slow, deliberate motion that made a faint tearing sound. Not quite ripping the fabric, but coming close enough that I whimpered before I could stop myself. It heard that whimper. It froze, and I swear to you it smirked. Its eyes narrowed like it knew exactly what it was doing to me. And then it moved, circling the tent, each step slow and heavy, dirt crunching under its weight, the air inside growing stifling. I was so scared I couldn't even make a noise. I don't know if anybody's been so scared that no sound will come out of their mouth, but that's what was happening at that moment. And then that creature stopped again. I could tell it was crouched right beside my head. I heard it breathing, steady, controlled, like a man concentrating. The warmth of its breath seeped through the fabric, carrying that same sick metallic odor. My brother didn't stir once. He slept like the dead while I lay there shaking, tears slipping down my cheeks, thinking that we were going to die. Every few seconds that thing would move slightly. It would sniff, exhale, scrape its claws lightly against the nylon. And every time I flinched, it paused like it was savoring it, like it was tasting my fear. And then it happened. I lost control. The warmth spread through my sleeping bag before I even realized what I'd done. I'd wet myself out of fear. I was shaking so hard my teeth were actually clicking together. I was trying to scream, but nothing would come out still. The thing seemed to notice instantly when I peed myself. It leaned closer, letting out a deep, rumbling snort, and then another. It was smelling it, sniffing, growling low, a sound like it was almost pleasured. The tent fabric bulged inwards with each breath. I could see the curve of its grin again, lips curling just enough to flash those long yellow teeth. The eyes didn't blink. They just watched me triumphantly, like it knew that I was broken and it was proud of what it had done to me. It didn't move for what felt like forever after that, just crouched there, breathing, smiling that awful human-like smile and staring at me. And I realized then that it wasn't hunting. It was enjoying this. It didn't want food, it wanted me to be afraid. What kind of creature can do that? What kind of entity feeds off of fear? Nowadays, I think that this creature is something from another dimension entirely. I don't know if it's a demon or some kind of creature that feeds on fear, but it was very evident to me that this thing was not from this world. Like I said, it crouched there for what felt like an eternity. Its weight was just shifting softly in the dirt beside me. I could hear the claws still scraping on the ground. I could hear the wet sounds of its breathing. And then, from the next tent over, I heard my dad stir. It was small at first, just a cough, rough and sudden, breaking the silence like a starter pistol. Then the rustle of his sleeping bag, and a zipper tugging halfway open. He muttered something low to my mom, probably wondering why the woods had gone so damn quiet. That thing froze, and looked towards the tent that my dad was in. Every muscle in my body locked up as it lifted its head slightly. I could feel it was deciding what to do next. You could almost feel the intelligence behind it. And then slowly it began to rise. The top of the tent darkened completely as it stood to its full height. The moonlight vanished again, blocked out by that towering silhouette. It had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe even 8 feet tall. I just know that our tent looked puny compared to it. For one heartbeat, it lingered there, staring straight down at me through the mesh. A low rumble sound came from its chest. Not a growl exactly, but something that I feel is worse. It was deep, almost human-like a grunt of annoyance or anger. And then it turned and moved off. The first few steps were slow, definitely silent. The only thing I could think was it was going to attack my dad. I lost it. I found my voice. I started screaming for my dad to run, that there was a monster outside, and then came a sudden crash of brush and snapping wood. Whatever it was, it moved so fast. Too fast for anything that size. It ran from the campsite as my dad started swearing, wondering what the hell was going on. And that's when I broke. I screamed, loud and hoarse, a sound that barely felt like it was my own voice. My brother shot up, yelling in confusion. I was already scrambling out of the sleeping bag, pointing toward the tent wall, sobbing so hard that my chest hurt. My dad burst through the tent flap, flashlight in hand, asking what happened. My mom followed, half-dressed, eyes wide. I couldn't get the words out fast enough. Something was here. It was right there. It was looking at me. My dad ripped open the tent flap and looked outside, sweeping the light across the ground, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows in the stillness of the forest. Then his beam hit the dirt beside my tent. There weren't impressions or footprints or anything, but it was evident that something large had moved around there and shuffled the dirt. He turned back to me. I saw his eyes narrow, and I could see him realize that he knew I wasn't having a nightmare. I was soaked, trembling, stammering. It was real, Dad. It was real. Dad didn't argue with me that night. He saw my face, saw the state that I was in, and that was enough. He helped me out of the tent and told my brother to grab his pillow. We all moved into my parents' tent together. Mom handed me a clean pair of pajama pants from her duffel and a towel, whispering to me that it was okay, that I just had a bad dream. But I could tell that her voice was shaking a little too. I changed as fast as I could, still glancing over my shoulder at the trees, certain that I'd see those eyes again. When I finally crawled into my parents' tent, Dad zipped it up tight, sat with his flashlight in his hand, and just listened. Nobody said much after that. My brother fell asleep pressed against my mom. I lay next to Dad, curled up close to his side, the fabric of his flannel shirt bunched into my fist. I don't think he slept at all. Every few minutes he'd flick on the flashlight toward the flap, scanning the trees beyond it. Once or twice, I thought I heard something far off, maybe branches shifting, or a low sound like wind, but nothing came back. The night felt like it crawled by 1 minute at a time. I kept waiting for it to return, to press its claw against the fabric, to look through and hurt us, but it never did. But even as the hours passed and the crickets slowly started to sing again, I never shook the feeling that it was still out there, probably watching us from somewhere. By morning, I was sick. Literally sick. My stomach hurt so bad I couldn't stand upright for long. Mom said it was nerves or food poisoning, but I knew better. I didn't eat one bite of breakfast when Dad made the call. We were packing up. The trip was over. We left before noon. I watched the trees blur past the truck window, and every shadow between them felt alive. But that was the last camping trip we ever took as a family, because I refused to ever go back there. I'm a grown man now, pushing 40, got a family of my own. They've never camped. They never will, as far as I'm concerned. But that night, it still sits in the back of my mind like a splinter that won't come out, and that's why I can't have my family out in the woods. You see, I've read enough now about the beast of the land between the lakes and every other dogman to know that what I saw matches the stories. Those things are tall, they stand upright, they have eyes that seem to glow with thought behind them. The worst part, it's not the size or the claws or the eyes. It's the way that thing looked at me. The way they're always described looking at people. Like they understand exactly what fear is. And you know what? You will never be able to change my mind that the thing that I saw loved the fear that it caused me. It didn't want to eat me. It wanted to see me break. And I think it feeds on fear. That night, I gave it everything it wanted, and it had one hell of a full meal. My name's Emily Carter, and at the time this happened, I was a junior biology student at Murray State University. I was spending my summer working on a field research project at the Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area. I was cataloging deer movement patterns for a wildlife behavior study. It was my first real taste of field work. No professors hovering, no controlled conditions, just me, a tent, and the woods. I'd always believed that every sound, every shadow, every old story could be explained with data and patience. Science had an answer for everything. At least, that's what I thought before that night. It was late June, one of those evenings where the air feels thick but the temperature isn't unbearable. I was set up near one of the restricted access trails, far enough in that the nearest campground was over a mile away. The insects had just started their evening buzz that night, and the light filtering through the trees had gotten golden. It looked like syrup that tells you the day's almost over. Locals had warned me about things in the LBL. Stories of howls, mutilated deer, even a family gone missing decades ago. I'm sure you've heard that story. I've laughed it off as backwoods folklore the entire time. But that night, let's just say I stopped laughing. I thought I'd see a bunch of deer that evening, but what I saw wasn't supposed to exist. By the time the night actually rolled in, I'd been in the field for nearly 3 weeks. My main task was to monitor white-tailed deer behavior around different vegetation zones. I used a mix of trail cameras, motion sensors, and a pair of borrowed thermal binoculars to record movement without disturbing the animals. Most nights were uneventful, just long stretches of waiting, scribbling notes, and swatting mosquitoes. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the forest, how predictable it all felt once you learned to listen. That evening, I set up about 80 yards from a small clearing not far from a dried creek bed. My camp was only a few hundred yards back along the trail, hidden behind a thicket. The plan was simple. Log the activity around dusk, when they usually come out to graze before retreating deeper into the woods. Sure enough, around 8 o'clock, a doe stepped cautiously into the clearing, followed by a fawn that couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. They fed quietly, twitching their tails and flicking their ears at gnats. Then, without warning, the forest seemed to exhale and hold its breath. The usual hum of insects faded, like someone had turned the volume knob down on the whole woods. Even the air felt weird. I heard a faint thud, thud, thud from somewhere to my left. At first, I figured it was another deer moving through the brush, or maybe even a coyote shifting its weight. But then everything went still. The doe froze mid-chew, head snapping up, ears rigid. The fawn locked in place beside her. Something was out there, and it wasn't me. I lifted my thermal binoculars, scanning the direction the sound had come from. The heat signatures popped in sharp contrast. Small critters glowing faintly here and there, and the doe and her fawn blazing right in the center of my view. Then, something shifted behind them. At first, I had no idea what I was looking at. Just a giant, clumped mass crouched down. But then it moved. It was low to the ground, barely visible through the tangle of brush. Something massive was crouched there. I looked away from the thermals and squinted into the dim light. The outline was unmistakable. Shoulders broad and high, easily chest level on a grown man even while hunched. Its arms were long, braced against the dirt like it was a sprinter waiting for the starting gun. And it wasn't trembling with animal impatience. It was waiting, calculating. Through the thermal view, I could see it testing the air, lifting its head slightly, nostrils working, I assumed. Then it settled again, as though gauging the right moment. My logical brain scrambled for labels. A bear, maybe? They were rare around there, but not impossible. But no bear I'd ever seen moved like that. The shape was wrong, it was too lean, too long-limbed, and the heat distribution, it was balanced evenly, more upright than any quadruped. The faint breeze brushed against my face, drifting from me toward the clearing. I realized with a chill that is what that thing had been waiting for. To catch the scent of the deer before moving. That wasn't instinct, that was strategy. The doe twitched. It was clear that she was uneasy, but she didn't run. The fawn's head lifted. For a tense few seconds, the world seemed frozen in that twilight hush. And then the brush exploded. This thing moved in a blur. This black-gray flash surging forward on all fours. silent except for the thump of the weight hitting the ground. It closed the distance in seconds, 30, maybe 40 feet, and it hit the clearing like a storm. The fawn bolted a step too late. This guttural sound tore through the trees, half bark, half scream, so deep I could feel it in my chest. This thing had made a kill instantly, and it was excited about it. That creature snatched the fawn mid-run, its claws hooked around that small body with horrifying precision. The doe screamed once, just this short, strangled sound, and then crashed into the trees and vanished. The fawn's cries cut off just as suddenly, and it was replaced by this wet, rustling noise. Luckily, it didn't take very long. I froze. Every nerve screamed to run, to do something, but my hands locked around the binoculars and I couldn't look away. That thing straightened slowly, rising to its full height, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a man. It was both and neither at the same time. It stood upright, towering well over 7 feet. Its frame was thick but sinewy. Muscles were visible even beneath the matted gray-black fur. Its chest was broad, tapering down to narrow hips and long, digitigrade legs that bent wrong for anything human. Its head was elongated, with a pronounced snout and ears that stood erect like a wolf's. And those eyes, even through the thermal, I could see the brightness. It wasn't just heat I was looking at. Even staring through that device, something felt alive and aware that no animal exhibits. It held the fawn by its midsection with one arm, the way a person might carry a grocery bag. It turns its head, scanning the tree line, calm and efficient. Not an ounce of panic or wildness in its movements, just this purpose. I slowly lowered the binoculars. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would give me away for sure. The forest was silent again, except for my own pulse. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't feeding like it should. This thing was hunting with some kind of intention that most animals don't exhibit. And now, it had what it came for. It stood there for several long seconds, not feeding, not tearing into its kill in any way a predator that I'd ever studied did. Instead, it looked around. Slowly, intentionally. Its head turned from side to side, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. It was scanning the tree line, and I realized with this growing horror that it wasn't instinct. It was awareness. It wasn't just making sure the area was clear, it was making sure that it wasn't being watched. And then it stopped, dead still, head angled slightly, and it looked directly towards my position. I have never felt that kind of fear. My heart stopped beating. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I'm not even sure I could do any of that at that moment. Through the gap in the leaves, I could just make out the eyes reflecting the light. I was terrified that it knew where I was, and that I was going to be the next thing that it killed. How it was even possible that it knew exactly where I was, I have no idea. I'm still not certain that it knew where I was, but it sure as hell felt like it. It sniffed the air again, and just as suddenly it turned away. No sound of retreat or alarm. It simply shifted the fawn's weight in its arm and walked off, upright like it was nothing. I watched it move through the trees, each step unnervingly smooth for something so large. It ducked under a low limb, pushed through a curtain of brush, and vanished into the denser part of the woods. It wasn't running from danger. It was returning to it, like it was going towards a lair or something. Now, every rational thought in my head screamed to get back to camp and to get the hell out of there. But this other part of me, a curious, stupid academic part, wanted to know where it was taking that fawn. I wanted to know more about this creature. So I moved parallel to its path, keeping my distance, careful to stay downwind, but definitely following behind some kind of monster that just walked into the forest. My boots barely touched the ground, I was being so careful. But the forest swallowed that thing quickly. For a few seconds, I caught glimpses of movement between the trunks, shoulders rolling, fur catching faint traces of light, and then nothing. Just the echo of branches bending under its weight. And then that silence again, heavy and absolute, like wherever it was going, everything around it was making sure to not make a sound. I stopped at that point. My throat was dry, my palms were slick with sweat. The woods felt wrong, like something massive had just passed through and every living thing was holding still in reverence or fear. When I finally dared to move again, I noticed the ground where it had walked, and there were these massive impressions in the soil. It was bipedal for sure. Long strides, easily twice my own. Each print was elongated, 5 toes visible, but the ends weren't rounded like a man's, they were tapered into deep, sharp claws that dug into the earth. I pulled out my camera, crouched low, and snapped a picture. The flash popped against the dark, and I instantly regretted it. My pulse was spiking at the thought of drawing attention, and I did not take another picture. Nothing stirred, but I didn't wait for a second chance. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the path that it had taken until I couldn't see the clearing anymore. By the time I stumbled back into camp, dusk had slipped into full night. The forest had come alive again, but the sounds didn't comfort me like they used to. They just reminded me of how small I was out there. I didn't bother with dinner, didn't even unzip my tent. I threw everything I could into my pack, yanked out the stakes of the ground, and started walking towards the service road with my flashlight shaking in my hand. I've spent countless nights alone in the woods for research projects and for fun, but that was the first time I felt like I didn't belong there. Like I was trespassing on something's home turf. The next morning, after driving into Grand Rivers and sitting in my car for an hour trying to make sense of what I'd seen, I called my faculty advisor. I told him I'd spotted something large. Maybe a bear, I said, though my voice betrayed how unsure I was. He chuckled and reminded me that black bears hadn't officially been confirmed in that section of the LBL for years. Probably a big stray dog, he said. They can look huge in low light. I didn't argue. What could I say? No, Professor, I saw a werewolf carrying off a deer like a grocery bag. Goodbye, academia. Goodbye, anything that could resemble any type of career. A few weeks later, I returned to collect data from the trail cam that I'd placed near that clearing. The tree was still there, but the camera wasn't. Just these weird gouges in the bark, like something had torn it off and just tossed it away. I searched for hours, found nothing. Whether it was an animal, a person, or the same thing I saw that night, I'll never know. When I mentioned it at a small diner near the north entrance, the waitress got really quiet. And this old guy sitting a couple of stools down looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer him, but he nodded anyway like he already knew. As for the picture, well, I learned that you don't talk about those things unless you trust people. Because that whole digital camera went missing not long after I opened my mouth at that diner. You connect the dots how you want to. I've already done that. I don't think that camera going missing was a coincidence. In the time since then, I've gone over every possible explanation. A misidentified bear? No, wrong body structure. A primate? Impossible. There's no viable population here. Genetic mutation? Maybe, though evolution doesn't produce apex predators overnight. The most logical theory that I've come up with, that doesn't have anything to do with the supernatural, is a relic hominid. Something that diverged millions of years ago, surviving in deep isolation, that's learned to survive without us knowing, because it's extremely intelligent, very territorial, and obviously predatory. Whatever it wasn't supposed to exist, but I saw it, and I believe others have too. All of these stories and these encounters can't be misidentified animals. People vanish out there every year. Hunters, campers, hikers. Most are written off as accidents or animal attacks, but after that night I stopped questioning why, because I knew who the culprit was. And if half of the stories that come out of the land between the lakes about a werewolf are credible, I fear we're in some serious trouble.